It began with a single broadcast across the stars. The Galactic Council was gathered in their massive chamber that floated between suns, a hall made of silver and light, where thousands of species debated the laws of the galaxy. In the center stood the Emperor of the Valorian Dominion, a tall figure with crystal armor that shimmered like fire. His voice echoed across the chamber, deep and proud, as he pointed one long finger toward the small group of human representatives standing at the edge of the floor. The humans had come to request equal status in the council. They had followed every rule, signed every treaty, and helped rebuild colonies that had been destroyed in wars they never started. They had even offered technology and medicine that saved lives on worlds no one else cared about. But the Emperor only saw weakness in them. His golden eyes narrowed as he spoke, and his words were broadcast to every corner of known space. He called Earth a dust ball, a primitive world that should have stayed silent and obedient. He said that humans were nothing but lucky survivors of a forgotten war, scavengers living on borrowed time. The chamber erupted in laughter from his supporters, while other species remained quiet, afraid to speak against him. The insult hit the humans harder than any weapon could. Ambassador Ryan Hale stood at the center of the human delegation, his hands trembling slightly at his side. He had practiced diplomacy for years, studied alien culture, and believed that reason and respect could unite the galaxy. But as the Emperor's words filled the air, he felt something deeper awaken inside him, something older than fear. He simply bowed his head, said nothing, and walked out of the chamber with his team behind him. The broadcast continued long after they had left, spreading through the networks of every system. On distant colonies, aliens replayed the moment over and over, laughing at how easily Earth had been humiliated. On Earth itself, people watched in silence. No protests, no shouts, no threats. The message was clear, and the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. For days, the news ran wild across galactic channels. Analysts and commentators mocked humanity's quiet retreat. The Emperor's supporters called it proof that Earth had no place among the stars. Others said the humans were simply afraid to fight. In the great capital of Valora Prime, the Emperor celebrated his speech with parades. Statues of Valorian soldiers were raised higher, and banners were hung across the city showing the Dominion symbol, a silver sun devouring smaller stars. The message was clear to every world under his control. No one challenged the Valorian Empire. Those who tried were erased or enslaved. Their planets turned into outposts for the Dominion fleet. Many species had already suffered that fate. Humanity, the youngest civilization to reach interstellar space, had now been publicly humiliated in front of them all. But even as the galaxy celebrated the Emperor's victory, no one noticed that Earth had gone quiet in a way that was not normal. The silence was not defeat. It was planning. In the underground halls of the Earth Defense Directorate, a meeting was held without cameras, without broadcasts, without words that could be traced. Generals, scientists, and diplomats gathered beneath the lunar surface, their faces lit by the blue light of holographic screens. The insult had awakened something that had been sleeping since the old wars. Humanity remembered what it was like to be underestimated. Every human who had ever been told they were weak, every nation that had once been called inferior, every soldier who had fought for survival, they all shared that memory in their blood. The project that began that night was called Aegis, though no one outside Earth would hear that name for months. It was not revenge they sought, but balance. Humanity had learned enough about the galaxy to know that peace could not be built on the mercy of tyrants. While the Emperor celebrated, Earth began to move quietly. Shipyards that had been shut down after the war were reopened. Factories on Mars began producing materials in secret. Engineers worked day and night to redesign ships not meant for exploration, but for protection. The new vessels were not large or flashy like the Valorian dreadnoughts. They were smaller, faster, and built with precision that came from human hands. Every line, every circuit, every bolt was crafted for a single purpose: to survive. On the dark side of the moon, massive structures began to rise, hidden from satellites and probes. In the oceans of Earth, submarines that once patrolled the deep were converted into communication relays, linking every human colony into a single silent network. And through it all, not a single announcement was made. No speeches, no threats, no calls for war. The humans simply vanished from the public eye. Ambassador Hale continued his duties as if nothing had happened. He attended meetings, signed small trade deals, and smiled politely at those who mocked him. But behind his calm eyes, he watched everything. Reports came in about Valorian ships tightening control over trade routes, cutting off supplies to human colonies, and taxing neutral planets that traded with Earth. The Emperor believed he had broken humanity's spirit. But Hale knew better. He had seen the look in the eyes of the engineers who left Earth that night. He had seen the determination in the soldiers who refused to retire. Something was building, something quiet and unstoppable. Weeks turned into months. The galaxy soon lost interest in the insult, moving on to new conflicts and political games. The Emperor began preparing for another campaign to expand his borders. He believed the Dominion's power was eternal. He had forgotten that every empire in history, no matter how vast, had believed the same thing before it fell. Earth's silence continued to bother a few within the council. A young scholar from the Kareth species warned that the humans were planning something, but he was laughed out of the chamber. No one listened. Why would anyone fear a species that came from one small blue planet with barely a dozen colonies? But deep in the black of space, something new stirred. Cargo ships that once traveled alone began moving in coordinated patterns. Civilian transport vessels had their engines replaced with advanced drives. Mining stations on asteroids began transmitting coded signals. The Terran network had become something the Dominion could not trace. For the first time in history, Earth was united, not by fear but by purpose. Humanity had been insulted not by words but by arrogance. They would answer, not with noise but with results. The Emperor's ministers began to notice strange data coming from border systems. Energy readings that did not match known ships. Satellites disappearing near human sectors. When asked for an explanation, the Emperor dismissed it all. He said the humans were probably hiding behind their moon again, building toys that would never match Valorian strength. His laughter filled the throne room, echoed by courtiers who feared to disagree. But in his heart, a small unease began to grow. Empires built on fear rarely recognize danger until it stands at their door. One night, Ambassador Hale stood alone in his quarters aboard a Terran station orbiting Mars. He watched the stars, thinking of the Emperor's face as he spoke that day. Hale had no hatred in him, only resolve. He whispered to himself that humans did not want war, but they would never accept chains. His voice was low, steady, and full of something that no empire could ever crush: hope. Far below him, the red sands of Mars glowed faintly under the artificial lights of new cities being built faster than anyone thought possible. The air was thin, but the people working there breathed it with pride. Every miner, every engineer, every pilot knew why they worked without rest. They were building the future of their kind. Across the galaxy, merchants whispered rumors of human movements, ships that were never recorded, stations that appeared and vanished, weapons tests that left ripples in space. The Emperor's spies could find no proof, only silence. But silence itself began to feel like a threat. The galaxy had insulted Earth once before. Now it waited unknowingly for the storm that silence would bring. Earth stayed silent after the insult, but that silence was not peace. It was the deep quiet that comes before. Something powerful moves, the kind of quiet that hides the sound of steel being sharpened below the surface. The news of the Emperor's words had spread to every corner of space, and still Earth said nothing. No answers, no warnings, no messages, only silence, and that silence confused everyone the other races expected. Protests or declarations or begging, they expected humans to plead to the Council to undo the damage, but instead Earth closed its doors. The human ambassadors stopped attending meetings, and every broadcast from Earth ended with the same signal: a calm blue circle slowly turning over a black background, as if to say, we are here and we are waiting. On Mars, the red dust covered huge new structures that rose from the ground faster than any observer thought possible. Engineers worked day and night building shipyards under domes that glowed like fire in the thin atmosphere. Their faces were tired but proud. Each of them knew that they were building something the galaxy could not see. Yet they worked without rest because they remembered what had happened to their ancestors when humanity was divided. They remembered the times when nations had fallen because of pride and greed, and now they stood as one. The Terran Union had united every colony, every base, every ship under one command. For the first time in history, they were not fighting among themselves. They were preparing together, and even though no one outside Earth knew what they were building, the workers felt that history itself was watching. The Earth Defense Directorate met in secret halls far below the surface of the moon. The rooms were cold and quiet, full of blue lights and whispering machines. Each officer had a part to play and no one asked unnecessary questions. Orders came directly from the Council of Earth, and each person followed them without hesitation. Project Aegis had begun months earlier, but now it was growing faster than anyone predicted. The humans had always been clever with technology, but this time they had helped many alien scientists from smaller races came quietly to Earth. Seeking safety from the Dominion, they brought knowledge and designs the Valorians had stolen from others. And with that knowledge, humans created something new. They built hybrid engines that could move faster than light without leaving a trace. They designed hulls that absorbed energy instead of deflecting it. And they created drones that could think for themselves during combat. Ambassador Ryan Hale watched all of this from his quiet post on Luna Station. He had been called a coward by some and a fool by others, but he stayed calm. He met with engineers and officers and told them to move carefully and never speak of revenge. He knew the Emperor was watching, waiting for humanity to make a mistake. The Emperor wanted an excuse to destroy Earth completely, so Hale made sure there would be none. Every message he sent to the Council was filled with calm words of patience and logic. He played the role of a defeated man because he knew that the greatest power of humans had always been the ability to wait and adapt while others rushed into destruction. Meanwhile, the Emperor of the Valorian Dominion enjoyed the silence. He took it as proof that humanity had accepted defeat. He ordered new taxes on human colonies near the outer rim and sent patrol ships to show his power. He laughed during his meetings, telling his generals that humans had returned to their caves and forgotten what the stars looked like. His pride blinded him to the truth that every insult, every act of cruelty was only fueling something far more dangerous than rebellion. It was fueling unity. On the far side of Jupiter, a station that once served as a mining hub had been transformed into a secret factory. The workers there lived in silence. No communication with home, no contact with outsiders. Every window was sealed with metal, and every signal was coded. They worked under the supervision of Commander Tessa Ward, a woman known for her calm and sharp mind. She had once served as a pilot during the defense of Earth, and now she commanded hundreds of builders and scientists who created what she called the Shield Fleet. The ships they built had no names, no markings, only numbers, and each one was designed to function together like a single body. She told her crew that they were not building weapons. They were building survival itself. The first of these ships was launched into the void without ceremony. There were no cameras or speeches, only a low hum as the engines came alive, and the vessel disappeared into darkness. The moment it vanished, the engineers cheered softly, not because of glory, but because it meant hope. The ship's mission was simple. It would travel beyond the known borders, test the engines, and report back in silence. And when the signal returned days later, every technician stood still. The message was only one line: it worked. Back on Earth, factories worked under the cover of storms. Large towers hidden under the ocean produced materials that were sent into orbit disguised as waste shipments. Drones moved across the sky carrying parts to invisible platforms. Every move was planned to avoid detection. Human scientists had developed a new communication system that bounced signals through gravitational waves, making them invisible to scanners. This meant Earth could speak across its colonies without anyone hearing. The Valorian spies who tried to intercept signals only received static and began to doubt their equipment. But their masters told them to keep watching, believing that Earth was too primitive to hide anything so complex. The Emperor's ministers started to notice small shifts in trade routes. Ships from neutral worlds began to pass through human sectors again, even though the Dominion had banned it when they reported it to the Emperor. He dismissed them, saying no one would risk his wrath to trade with humans. He did not know that humanity was offering something the galaxy could not resist. Security. The humans began protecting trade convoys from pirates. They began offering repairs and fuel at low cost. Soon small planets that once feared the Dominion began sending secret messages to Earth asking for help. Ambassador Hale received these messages quietly and forwarded them to the Council. Each time he reminded them that their goal was not war, but strength. He said that respect was not given, it was earned, and Earth was earning it one world at a time. Still, he knew that the day would come when silence would no longer be enough. The Emperor's pride would push him too far, and when that happened, humanity had to be ready. The Emperor himself began to feel uneasy. His advisors argued over rumors of new human ships and strange energy readings near the Orion Gate, but he refused to believe them. He ordered the fleet to focus on expansion instead of defense. He wanted to show the galaxy that the Dominion was untouchable. He sent his armada to conquer another minor world near the edge of human territory, and when the planet surrendered without resistance, he laughed again. But far from his palace, something strange happened. The Valorian ships started experiencing brief blackouts in their systems. Navigation failed, communications dropped for seconds at a time. The commanders thought it was a glitch, but those few seconds were enough for human scouts to observe and record everything they needed. Back on Earth, Commander Tessa Ward reviewed the data. The Valorian fleet was massive but slow. Its ships depended on centralized commands and old systems. Their strength was in numbers, not in flexibility. Humans were different. They had always adapted faster than anyone expected. She looked at the holographic map and whispered that it was time to prepare the next phase. She knew the Emperor believed humanity was broken, and she planned to use that arrogance against him. As months passed, the galaxy grew restless. The trade routes shifted again. More neutral worlds quietly supported Earth. The Valorian Empire ignored the warning signs. They had seen this pattern before with other species, but none had ever dared to rise against them. What they did not understand was that humanity was not rising out of hatred. They were preparing out of necessity. They had learned from history that waiting was not weakness, it was timing. Ambassador Hale sat one night looking out the observation window of Luna Station. The stars shimmered against the black of space. He thought of the countless generations that had dreamed of reaching those stars, and now they stood on the edge of something greater. He knew war was coming. He did not want it, but he also knew it could no longer be avoided. He whispered quietly that humanity had been insulted, but soon they would answer. Not with words, but with silence that spoke louder than any threat. And as he watched the distant glimmer of the earth below, he knew the silence would not last forever. The storm was already building its wings, unseen and unstoppable. The day of the Emperor's parade began with light and music across the grand city of Valora Prime. Banners of gold and silver hung from the towers, and the streets were filled with millions of citizens cheering for their emperor. Soldiers marched in perfect formation, their armor shining under the twin suns. The sky above was full of ships moving in synchronized patterns, painting trails of blue fire that spelled out the symbol of the Dominion. It was a celebration of power, a display meant to remind the galaxy that no one could challenge the Valorian Empire. The Emperor stood on his crystal balcony overlooking the endless crowd, his robes gleaming, his eyes proud and cold. He raised his hand and the cheers grew louder than thunder. He smiled, believing his empire was eternal and his enemies forgotten. Far away from the noise, deep in a quiet corner of human space, a signal moved through the void. It was small and faint, but it traveled with purpose. It passed through coded relays hidden inside asteroids and bounced across gravity fields that only humans knew how to use. In seconds, it reached its destination, a small command room buried beneath the surface of the moon. Commander Tessa Ward stood there, her eyes fixed on the screen beside her. The message contained only 3 words: "We are coming." She felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with resolve. She turned to her officers and gave the order to begin the final phase. For months they had prepared in silence. Now the time for silence was ending. Across Earth and Mars, shipyards came alive. Engines ignited one after another, and the black sky filled with vessels that had no flags and no names. Their hulls absorbed light. Their engines whispered instead of roared. They moved like shadows, invisible to sensors, yet strong enough to tear through steel. Each ship carried human crews who had trained for years without recognition. They knew this mission was not about revenge. It was about survival. They were not going to start a war. They were going to finish an insult back on Valora Prime. The Emperor's celebration continued. The citizens believed their empire had no enemies left. They believed every world in the Dominion was loyal, and every rival too afraid to fight the Emperor. Gave his speech, his voice broadcast across the stars. He spoke of unity, strength, and destiny. He spoke of the Dominion's right to rule the weak, and how mercy was only for those who obeyed. His words echoed across systems, filling the channels that every ship and colony could hear. But then something happened. The broadcast changed for a moment. The sound broke and the image flickered. The Emperor frowned, thinking it was a small glitch, but when the image cleared, it was not his face on the screen anymore. It was a dark background with a single blue circle turning slowly. Then a voice spoke. Calm. Clear. Human. The voice said 3 words. We are coming. Then the signal vanished. For a few seconds, the galaxy stood in silence. No one understood what had happened. The Emperor's advisors rushed to restore the broadcast. The soldiers froze. The citizens stared at the sky, confused and afraid. The Emperor's face turned pale with rage. He ordered his guards to cut the feed, but the message had already spread across every system, every ship, every colony. The 3 words echoed like a whisper that refused to fade. We are coming. The Emperor shouted for answers, but no one had any. That same moment, on the edge of Dominion space, the first human fleet appeared. It came out of nowhere. No signal, no trace sensors detected nothing, until it was already too late. The Valorian patrol stationed near the Orion Gate barely had time to react. Their captains looked at their screens in confusion as unknown ships emerged from the darkness. They were sleek, black, and silent. They did not match any known design. Before the Valorians could open fire, the human ships moved faster than anything the Dominion had ever built. Their weapons were not bright beams of energy, but invisible pulses that cut through shields and engines. In seconds, ships that had stood for centuries were torn apart without warning. The battle lasted less than 15 minutes when it was over. The entire Valorian fleet had been destroyed. Only debris remained drifting through space. News of the attack reached Valora Prime within hours. The Emperor's generals argued in panic. Some said it was impossible. Others claimed it was a trick. But the data was undeniable. Thousands of lives lost and not a single human casualty. The Emperor refused to believe it. He called his admirals and ordered them to gather the Second Fleet to strike back. He demanded explanations. How had the humans built such ships? Where had they gotten the power? Who had helped them? No one could answer. The humans had done it alone. Ambassador Ryan Hale watched the reports from Luna Station. He stood quietly as his officers told him the details of the battle. His face showed no emotion. He simply nodded and said it was time to send the next message. His words were calm and measured. He reminded everyone that this was not conquest. It was demonstration. Humanity would not destroy, unless forced to. He knew the Emperor would not understand that message, but others in the galaxy would. Small worlds watching in fear would now see that Earth was not weak. The silence had ended, and the storm had begun. On Valora Prime, the Emperor raged through his palace, his voice echoing through the halls. He demanded the destruction of every human colony. He called for the heads of his spies who had failed to see this coming. He shouted that no one defies the Dominion without punishment. But even as he spoke, more reports arrived. Human fleets had appeared near the trade routes between neutral planets. They were not attacking. They were disabling Dominion ships and leaving them to drift. The captured crews were released unharmed with a simple message: tell your Emperor to remember his words. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone could understand. News spread that the human fleets were not attacking civilians. They were protecting them. Pirates fled from human sectors trade. Ships returned to routes once closed. Smaller worlds that had lived under Valorian taxes for decades began whispering of rebellion, and one by one they stopped sending tribute to the Emperor. His empire, that had seemed unshakable, began to tremble, not because of destruction but because of fear. The fear of silence, the fear of what else humanity might be hiding. Commander Tessa Ward stood in her command ship, the Horizon, as it moved through the remains of the First Fleet. She looked at the wreckage, floating in the darkness, pieces of once mighty Valorian dreadnoughts now silent and cold. She felt no joy, only determination. She ordered her officers to recover survivors and send them back to Valora Prime. She wanted them to see what had happened. She wanted them to carry the truth with their own eyes, that the humans had not come for vengeance but for respect. On Earth, people watched the broadcasts with quiet pride. Cities held no parades, there were no cheers. The president spoke only once, to say that humanity had defended its honor and that peace was still the goal. But everyone knew that peace would not return easily. Children watched the stars at night, whispering the same words that had started it all. We are coming. And even though they did not understand the full meaning, they could feel that something in history had changed forever. The Emperor tried to respond. He sent new fleets to search for the humans, but they found nothing. The human ships moved like ghosts, appearing and disappearing faster than scanners could track them. Entire Dominion stations reported strange interference. As if the humans could hide in the very light of space, panic spread among the Emperor's allies, and his ministers began to question his leadership. One of them dared to say that maybe the humans were not enemies but equals. The Emperor ordered his execution on the spot, but the whispers continued. As weeks passed, more systems began to break away from the Dominion worlds that had once feared the Emperor. Now sent envoys to Earth asking for protection. The humans accepted them quietly, building alliances instead of empires. The galaxy that had laughed at them now watched in awe. The words of the Emperor's insult were remembered, but twisted into irony. He had called Earth a primitive dust ball now that dust had risen to cover his empire. Ambassador Hale wrote his report to the Council, detailing every event. His hands moved slowly over the console as he described how one act of arrogance had changed the balance of the galaxy. He ended the message with a single line: "Silence can be the loudest answer of all." He sent it and looked out into the dark, thinking of the millions of lives still to be touched by what was happening. He knew this was only the beginning. In the grand palace of Valora Prime, the Emperor stood alone by his window, looking at the stars he once ruled. He could not sleep. The cheers of his people were gone, the music silent. He thought of the human message that had appeared during his parade, those 3 simple words that had stolen his glory and planted fear in his heart. He whispered them to himself, unable to forget them. "We are coming," and for the first time in his life, the Emperor of the greatest empire in the galaxy felt small beneath the endless sky. The stars above the Orion Gate burned bright as the Valorian First Fleet prepared for battle. Thousands of ships formed long silver lines stretching across the black void, their hulls gleaming under distant suns. The captains stood proud in their command chairs, believing that this would be an easy victory for the Empire. The Emperor himself had promised that this would be the day humanity was erased from the stars. He called it the cleansing of the primitive world. The Valorians had never lost a major battle in their history. They ruled through fear and power, and they thought that no one would ever dare to challenge them. The soldiers were confident their weapons were the most advanced in the galaxy, their ships larger than cities and their shields strong enough to withstand anything. They believed that the humans were foolish to even try. In a quiet corner of the battlefield, hidden behind a curtain of energy distortion, the human fleet waited. Their ships were small compared to the massive Valorian vessels, but they were built for one purpose: precision. Commander Tessa Ward stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Horizon. Her eyes calm and steady. Her crew worked silently, every hand moving with practiced ease. The ship's lights were dim, their voices low. No one spoke of fear. They had trained for this moment for years, and now it had come. The order was simple: hold position until the Valorians fired first. The Valorian commander, a tall alien with silver armor, ordered his fleet to advance. He laughed as he saw the small human ships appear on his sensors. He believed it would be a short fight. His voice filled the communication channels, mocking the humans. He told them to surrender before they were destroyed, but the humans said nothing. The silence angered him, and he ordered his ships to open fire. Thousands of beams of light streaked across the darkness, colliding with the empty space. Where the human ships had been, the Valorians cheered, thinking they had won, but their celebration lasted only seconds. The space around them rippled, and dozens of human ships reappeared, their stealth systems deactivated only long enough to strike. The human weapons were nothing like the Valorians had ever seen. Their beams were invisible, their torpedoes silent. They hit with precise timing, cutting through the massive Valorian shields as if they were air. Entire battleships vanished in flashes of white. The Valorian commander shouted for his ships to return fire, but their systems were already failing. Communications broke apart. Sensors went blind. Engines froze one by one. The giant ships began to drift powerless. The humans did not destroy them all. They moved methodically, disabling weapons and engines but sparing crews. Every strike was planned and calculated. Within 12 minutes, the first fleet of the Valorian Dominion was gone. On the horizon, Commander Ward watched the battlefield. Her face expressionless, she could see the debris floating, the broken pieces of once mighty ships drifting like ashes in the dark. Her officers reported that not a single human life had been lost. She nodded slowly and ordered her fleet to pull back. No pursuit, no more attacks. She wanted the message to be clear. Strength without cruelty, control without chaos. She sent a short transmission to the nearest Valorian station. Your empire attacked? We defended. Let this be your warning, then. She turned away and the human fleet vanished into the black. When news of the defeat reached Valora Prime, the great city fell into shock. The Emperor's court was silent as the report was read aloud. Every minister, every general stared in disbelief. The words seemed impossible to them. An entire fleet destroyed in minutes by humans. The Emperor rose from his throne, his face pale, his hands trembling with rage. He shouted that the report was false, that it had to be a lie. He accused his commanders of cowardice and ordered the survivors to be brought before him within days. The first of them arrived. Broken ships limping back to the capital. The crews looked haunted. They spoke of ships that moved faster than light, without engines, of weapons that struck without warning, and of silence more terrifying than any battle cry. The Emperor refused to accept it. He ordered a new fleet to be assembled. The second fleet would be even larger, and he commanded that it hunt down every human ship in existence. He promised rewards to those who brought him human prisoners and death to those who failed. But deep inside, even he felt the first shadow of fear. His empire had faced rebellions before, but never something like this. He did not understand how humans had built such power so quickly. He demanded answers from his scientists, but they could only guess. They said it was impossible for humans to have advanced so far in so little time. But the data proved otherwise. Across the galaxy, smaller worlds began to whisper about what had happened. The story spread faster than light. Colonies that had lived under Valorian rule for centuries began to hope that the Emperor could be defeated. Some even started to refuse paying their taxes, claiming that the humans had shown them that the Dominion was not invincible. In marketplaces on distant worlds, traders told tales of human ships appearing from nowhere, protecting convoys from pirates, and then vanishing. Without a trace, the name of Earth became a symbol of courage and resistance, and the Emperor's pride began to turn into desperation. On Luna Station, Ambassador Ryan Hale received the official reports. He read them quietly without expression, but inside he felt the weight of what it meant. He knew that history had changed forever. He gathered his officers and told them that they must continue with care. He reminded them that humanity's strength came from discipline, not anger. He said that they had proven their power, but they must never become what they fought against. He sent a message to the Council of Earth, saying that the time for silence was over, but the time for wisdom had begun. Meanwhile, the Valorian citizens began to question everything they had been told for generations. They had been taught that the Dominion was eternal, that no one could challenge its fleets. But now entire sectors were in chaos. Families of soldiers demanded to know why their sons and daughters had been sent to die in a war of pride and propaganda. The Emperor responded with more speeches promising vengeance and victory, but fewer and fewer believed him. His empire was beginning to rot from within. Commander Tessa Ward and her crew returned to the hidden base near Jupiter, where they repaired their ships and analyzed the battle data. The results were clear. The Valorian technology, though vast, was outdated. Their systems relied on central control, making them slow to adapt. Humans were faster, more flexible. Their ships could act independently without waiting for orders. She sent her analysis to Ambassador Hale with a short note. The enemy's weakness is their pride, and our strength is our unity. He read it and knew she was right. The next weeks were filled with silence again, but this time it was not fear, it was preparation. Humanity did not rush to attack. They let the galaxy speak for them. Every world that questioned the Dominion added more pressure to the Emperor's rule. The Valorians began to lose trade partners. They began to lose control of border colonies. The Emperor's rage grew, but his power shrank. And still he did not understand the full truth that humanity had no desire to conquer. They only wanted to be treated as equals. But when denied equality, they had become something unstoppable. On the 10th day after the battle, the Emperor called for a grand address. He wanted to show that he was still strong. He appeared before the cameras dressed in shining, armor, and surrounded by guards, he declared that the Dominion would crush humanity and erase their worlds from existence. But even as he spoke, his advisors received a new message, a video signal intercepted from a neutral world. It showed human aid, ships landing on colonies once ruled by the Dominion, bringing food, medicine, and power cells. The crowd that watched the Emperor's speech saw it too and began to whisper. His voice faltered. His eyes burned with anger. He ended the speech early and stormed out of the hall in the quiet of his chamber. He stood alone, staring out at the stars. His reflection glimmered on the glass. He thought of the humans, those strange creatures from a small blue planet that refused to kneel. He remembered the words that had started it all, his own insult that had been broadcast across the galaxy. He had meant to humiliate them, but instead, he had awakened them. Now his empire trembled because of his arrogance, and for the first time in his life he felt powerless. The stars that had always seemed close now looked far away, cold and unreachable. Commander Ward sat in her chair aboard the horizon, looking at the same stars. She knew the war was not over. She knew the Emperor would strike again, but she also knew that humanity had already won something greater. They had earned respect. They had shown that courage and unity could break even the strongest chains. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of all those who had worked and waited in silence for this day. And she whispered softly, so only her crew could hear, "This is only the beginning," and then she gave the order for the fleet to move out into the dark once more, ready for whatever came next. The Emperor did not sleep that night. He stood by the great window of his palace, looking at the endless darkness of space. The stars that once looked like jewels now seemed like eyes watching him, judging him. The chamber around him was silent, except for the soft hum of the floating lights. His guards stood motionless by the door. None dared to speak. He had not eaten in 2 days. His anger was too deep. It burned in his chest like fire. But under the anger was something else. A feeling he could not name. It felt like a shadow pressing on his heart, and he hated it more than anything. On the other side of the galaxy, humanity was changing. Their cities were brighter, their skies filled with new ships. People worked day and night, not for war, but for building peace. Their scientists studied the Valorian wrecks, learning how to use what they had found. Their engineers worked in silence, upgrading every part of their fleet, while children watched news of their victory on glowing screens. They felt proud for the first time in centuries. There was unity on Earth. Every country, every colony, every human voice spoke the same promise: never again would they bow to anyone. Commander Tessa Ward spent long hours in the command center deep below the lunar surface. The room was filled with soft blue light screens showing data from distant systems. Her crew moved quietly. They had become more than soldiers. They were builders of a new future. Every message that came from human outposts spoke of strength, but also of fear. They all knew that the Emperor would not stop. She looked at the reports showing strange movements of Valorian fleets near the outer rim. She understood what it meant. Another war was coming, and this time it would be even larger. The Emperor's new fleet was gathering. Near the twin suns of Velkar, his engineers had been ordered to design new weapons faster, stronger, deadlier. His scientists worked without rest, creating machines that could destroy entire planets in moments. He wanted to crush humanity so completely that no one would even remember their name. He gave speeches to his people, telling them that the Dominion would rise again, that the last battle had only been a test. But his words no longer carried the same fire. Fewer ships arrived each day. Fewer soldiers volunteered. His empire was beginning to fear him rather than follow him. Aboard the horizon, Tessa stood at the observation deck, watching Earth turning slowly below. It was peaceful and blue, so small compared to the vastness of space. She wondered if they were ready. She knew that the Valorians were desperate, and desperate enemies were the most dangerous. She turned to her officer, Captain Leon, who stood beside her, his face tired but steady. He told her that the latest communication from the outer colonies said that Valorian scouts had been seen near the border worlds. She nodded and ordered the fleet to prepare, but she wanted no attack. She wanted to wait until the truth was clear. Days passed with no sound. Then one morning, the sensors lit up, hundreds of signals appearing on the edge of human space. The Valorian Second Fleet had arrived. They moved in perfect formation, their engines glowing bright like fireflies in the dark. Tessa gave the order to power up shields, but not to fire. First, she wanted them to make the first move again. The Valorian sent a message. It was short and filled with pride. Surrender and be erased with honor. She did not answer. She let silence be the reply. The Valorians opened fire. Their weapons tore through the dark space, but this time humanity was ready. The human ships moved like shadows weaving through the beams. Their new energy shields absorbed most of the fire. Then the humans struck back their weapons, silent and swift, disabling the Valorian control systems. Entire lines of enemy ships went dark, one after another. Tessa watched as the enemy formation broke apart, but she did not cheer. She ordered her fleet to pull back, regroup, and protect the nearby colonies. She did not want victory through destruction. She wanted survival through wisdom. As the battle spread across the edge of the galaxy, word reached the neutral worlds. Once again, they saw that the humans fought not for conquest, but for defense. Traders from dozens of species began to send messages offering help. Some brought supplies. Others brought information for the first time in galactic history. Races that had never spoken to humans began to trust them. Stories of their courage spread faster than any fleet. The Valorian propaganda collapsed under the weight of truth, and even among their own soldiers, whispers began to grow that maybe the humans were not the enemy, but the future. The Emperor could feel his control. Slipping, his advisors avoided his gaze. His generals spoke in cautious voices. His scientists begged for more time. He screamed that time was useless. If they had no victory, he ordered the destruction of entire colonies that had shown sympathy for humanity. His cruelty grew with his fear, and the more he punished his people, the more they turned against him. Riots began in the outer worlds. Slaves broke free. Soldiers refused orders. Whole sectors declared independence. The empire that had lasted for centuries began to crumble from within. Back on Luna Station, Ambassador Ryan Hale received reports from dozens of worlds. He read them with a heavy heart, knowing that history was shifting faster than anyone could control. He met with Tessa in the strategy room. They stood before a glowing map showing the galaxy covered with signals of unrest. He told her that the time might come when they would have to choose between finishing the empire or helping it rebuild. She listened silently and then said that humanity must never become what the Valorians were. They agreed that after this war there would be no more chains. Meanwhile, far from both of them, on a small moon orbiting a dead planet, a group of Valorian scientists made a discovery. They had recovered fragments of human data from captured ships, and what they found amazed them. Human technology was not just new. It was built on principles the Valorians had never considered. It was creative, adaptive, alive. The scientists realized that humanity's strength came not from weapons but from imagination. They sent a secret message to the Emperor telling him that they should seek peace before it was too late. He ignored it and ordered them executed. The final moment came when the Emperor launched his last weapon, a colossal ship called the Hand of Dominion. It was larger than any city. It carried enough firepower to burn half a system. The Valorians believed it would end the war, but humanity had already seen it coming. Their spies had warned them weeks before. Tessa gathered her fleet not to destroy the weapon but to disable it. She planned to end the war without wiping out millions of lives when the Hand of Dominion appeared in human space, its engines lighting up. Like a second sun, she ordered her ships to move in every human vessel, focus their energy on a single point, the reactor core deep inside the giant ship. For hours, the sky above the colonies burned, ships weaving through chaos, explosions, lighting. The dark, the Hand of Dominion fired again and again, destroying moons and burning atmospheres, but the humans held their line. Tessa's ship was hit once and half her crew injured, but she refused to retreat. She kept her focus on the reactor until, finally, her chief engineer shouted that the signal was locked. She gave the final command, and the human fleet released a single pulse of energy, invisible and soundless. It passed through the massive ship, and in one heartbeat, the lights inside the Hand of Dominion went out. It drifted powerless and silent across the void. When the battle was over, humanity did not cheer. They watched as the Valorian survivors sent distress calls. Tessa ordered medical ships to rescue them. She sent a message to the Valorian capital. "We are not your enemies, we are what you could be if you choose to change." The message spread across the galaxy faster than light. Every race heard it, and for the first time in history the idea of peace sounded stronger than fear. In his palace, the Emperor listened to the message, his hands trembling. He looked around and saw that he was alone, his guards gone. His advisors fled. The screens around him showed riots across his empire, statues of him being torn down, cities burning. His eyes filled with rage and sorrow. He realized that he had built an empire on fear, and now fear had destroyed it. He fell to his knees as the last lights of his rule faded, and for the first time he whispered a word he had never spoken: forgiveness. Tessa stood at the window of the horizon watching the stars. She thought of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. She knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time she felt hope. She turned to her crew and said softly, "This is what we fought for. Not power, not revenge, but a chance for peace." Her words were carried through the ship like a quiet wind. Every soul aboard felt the same calm. They had survived. They had proven that even in the darkest nightlight could still rise, and so the fleet turned once more toward the stars, not to conquer, but to explore, to build, and to begin again. The Emperor's fall was not sudden. It was quiet, like a shadow spreading slowly over a once bright world. His palace was empty. Halls that had been filled with laughter and power now echoed with silence. Even his guards had left. Some joined the new councils that humanity offered. Others fled to worlds still loyal to the old dominion, the citizens of Valora Prime. No longer celebrated his victories. Instead, they whispered among themselves of mistakes and lessons learned. The mighty empire that had once stretched across thousands of worlds was crumbling because one of its leaders had forgotten the simplest truth: that arrogance cannot hold against unity. On Earth, people walked through streets that were calm and full of life. Children played beneath towers that shone with clean energy. Humans of every background moved side by side. The planet had changed in ways beyond technology. It had grown in confidence and understanding for centuries. Humans had struggled to survive against nature, famine, and war. But now they had faced the greatest power in the galaxy and survived. Their unity had been tested and proven. The quiet smile of Ambassador Ryan Hale as he watched the sky told everyone that they had won more than battles they had won. Respect. Commander Tessa Ward traveled from colony to colony, overseeing the rebuilding of worlds that had once been under the shadow of the Dominion. She did not call herself a conqueror. She did not call herself a hero. She called herself a guardian. She helped colonies repair their cities, teach them technology, and train their own defense forces so they would never again be at the mercy of tyrants. She listened to the people. She offered aid and guidance, not orders, and she reminded everyone that power was not in weapons alone. It was in the courage to use them wisely. The Emperor was taken to Earth under guard. He arrived on a ship that humans had designed for speed and safety. He was no longer clothed in gold. He had no guards, no banners. He was simply a man among people whose empire he had destroyed. His eyes were wide with fear and disbelief as he walked the streets of a city he had once claimed would never bow to anyone. Humans watched in silence. They did not cheer. They did not jeer. They simply observed, and in that observation lay the truth. He had ignored all these years that strength without justice is fragile, and pride without understanding is dangerous. In the council chambers of Earth, the Emperor stood before representatives from every world he had once ruled. Some of them had been loyal. Others had resisted, but all now witnessed a new era forming before their eyes. The humans did not demand punishment but accountability. They told the Emperor that the time of insult was over and the time of respect had begun. They explained that he would answer for his actions not through fear but through truth. He listened, and for the first time he understood the power of restraint. He had wielded all his life through threats, but the humans had used patience and unity to achieve far more. While the Emperor stood humbled, new leaders arose from the worlds once under the Dominion. They spoke of joining together, not for war but for trade, education, and mutual defense. They asked the humans to guide them in creating laws that respected life and freedom. They wanted a galaxy where no species would be afraid to live openly. The humans agreed but reminded them that respect must be earned through deeds, not titles. They established a council of equals, where every world had a voice, and Earth's representatives watched carefully to ensure that history would not repeat itself. The people of Earth celebrated quietly, not with fireworks or parades, but with work and learning. Every scientist, teacher, and engineer knew that the battles had been only the beginning of a longer journey. They helped rebuild planets that had suffered under the Dominion, and taught the value of cooperation over conquest colonies that had been loyal to the Valorians before learned new ways to survive and thrive. They studied human ways of planning, technology, and culture, and slowly a new galaxy began to take shape. A galaxy where fear no longer ruled the stars. Children born after the fall of the Valorian Empire grew up knowing stories of courage not as myth, but as history. They learned of the insult that started a war, and the patience and strategy that ended it. They learned that even the smallest planet could change the course of the galaxy if its people were united, and that no leader could succeed without humility. These lessons shaped their schools, their games, and their ideas, and in their laughter and learning the seeds of a new future were planted. Meanwhile, Ambassador Ryan Hale and Commander Tessa Ward continued to travel among the colonies. They met leaders, listened to concerns, and ensured that human guidance was always fair and careful. They helped create training programs for new diplomats and engineers, and maintained fleets, not for war, but for protection. The stories of humanity's restraint spread further than any weapon ever. Could other species saw that humans did not seek conquest, they only sought equality. And for the first time they trusted one planet to guide them without fear. The Emperor spent long hours reflecting on his actions. He visited worlds that he had once ruled as a tyrant and saw the devastation he had caused. He saw the patience of humans in the rebuilding of cities, and the hope in the eyes of children who would never have known freedom. If not for them, he began to speak with former advisors, not in commands but in questions, seeking understanding of how he had failed, and what he might learn from the humans he had insulted and opposed. He realized that his empire had fallen not because of strength but because of his failure to see the value of respect. 1 year after the final battle, a ceremony was held on Earth to honor all who had helped bring peace across the galaxy. Representatives from hundreds of worlds, attended humans and aliens alike, stood side by side and remembered the lessons of war and the power of patience. Every speech spoke not of victory but of cooperation. Every banner not of conquest but of hope. The Emperor himself stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching the new galaxy he had helped destroy being built into something better than he could ever have imagined. In the quiet of space, Commander Tessa Ward looked out at the stars. She saw planets once under Dominion control now thriving. They traded freely. They communicated openly. They built schools and hospitals and fleets for defense, not destruction. She thought of Earth and the small blue planet that had endured insult and ridicule yet had risen above it. She whispered softly to herself that the galaxy had learned the most important lesson of all. That strength is only true when paired with wisdom and respect. Human fleets no longer patrolled for war but for safety and guidance. Their engineers created new ships for exploration. New scientists studied the universe not for domination, but for knowledge colonies, built libraries and research centers. Humans and aliens worked together to map the stars and discover new life. The name of Earth became known across every system not as a threat, but as a symbol of unity and hope. Even the farthest corners of space that had never known peace now whispered stories of humans who stood together and changed the galaxy forever. The Emperor, once proud and feared, now traveled among humans and aliens, learning, listening, and teaching humility. He no longer wore armor nor demanded respect by force. He walked quietly, observed patiently, and understood deeply that the greatest power was not the ability to destroy but the ability to inspire change. The galaxy watched and learned alongside him. That day humanity did not just defeat an empire. They set the foundation for a future where no species would bow under fear, and where equality was not a dream but a guiding truth. As Earth rotated slowly beneath the sun, its cities glowing softly, Ambassador Hale and Commander Ward stood together on the observation deck of the horizon. Watching the galaxy they had helped shape, they saw trade routes opening. Freely, ships moving from world to world with no threat, no fear, only cooperation and growth. They knew that the work was not finished, but that it was beginning in earnest. The galaxy had changed forever, and at the center of that change stood humans who had been insulted, silenced, and underestimated, yet had shown the universe what it meant to rise with patience, wisdom, and honor. And so the story of insult and empire ended not with fire or blood, but with understanding and unity, a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations to come. The humans had not only survived, they had transformed the galaxy, and in every corner of space, the memory remained of the planet that refused to bow, and the empire that knelt at their feet.